take a seat. Welcome back to the R&I Days 2025. Great to see you all again here in the room. And for those online joining us, you're very welcome. Get involved in the conversation with Slido or also on social media. Now, the next session is all about choosing Europe to start and scale. We have a fantastic panel to dive right into that strategy that came out at the end of May, EU Startup and Scaleup. It was launched to make Europe the most attractive place to launch and grow global tech companies. So we're delighted to have a fantastic panel who've already started the debate in backstage. So in no particular order, help me in welcoming Elena Martinez. She's a cabinet member from the European Commission Sarajevo's office. Hedi Mariso, she's the CEO and co-founder of Cache from Estonia. We also have Heidi Skenen. She's the co-founder and CEO of the AI company ERT and a big figure in the Croatian startup scene. Welcome, ladies. And then we have Clark Parsons. He's the CEO of the European Startup Network. And your host for this conversation is Andras Inothai. He's from the Commission's Task Force on Startups and Scale-Ups. So Andras, you're very welcome, and your panelists. So lovely to have you with us. We're excited about this, so over to you.
Thank you very much, and a very good afternoon to all of you. I hope you enjoyed the spontaneous break that you had, which allows us to jump straight into our panel discussion today. What a great topic and what a great timing for our panel. Almost a year after Professor Draghi has delivered his much-awaited report. Very, very stark findings, also on the role of innovation, the role of productivity growth, and within that, the absolutely important role of startups and scale-ups. I think it's very clear that without a very lively and flourishing environment for startups and scale-ups, Europe will not be able to succeed in its competitiveness objectives. So this is also the reason why, as you have heard from both the President and Commissioner Zaharyeva, the Commission has adopted a few months ago the first ever EU startup and scale-up strategy with an ambition which is none other than being the best place in the world for startups and scale-ups to launch, to grow, and to also stay within the EU. Now, we do that through 26 robust actions. Implementation will be key. And I think this is also the best opportunity for this wonderful panel to start the discussion on three aspects related to the strategy. One of them is, how do we measure success? So strategies are as good as their execution. How will we know that we are on track? First round of question on measuring success, knowing that we're on the right track. Then we will also discuss a bit about strategic technologies. Where does Europe already stand firm? Where do we need to do more? And then lastly, very important, how do we engage? How do we coordinate? How the stakeholder community, the institutions can come together to deliver on the strategy. So I would start with the first question on how do we know success? And we have some positive signs. So we see that venture capital funding in the EU has tripled in the last decade. We have almost as many startups, even more than the US. Things are going, in some aspects, well. But if we're 2029, let's imagine we are in the year 2029. That's the end of the mandate of the current Commission. How do we know that the Commission and the EU as a whole has been successful in delivering on the strategy? So let me jump straight to Hedi to give her appreciation of how do we know in 2029 whether we're on the right track?
All right. Hello. Nice to meet you all. So I'll start by, you asked two parts. So one is starting the company and then scaling the company. I think starting the company, the experience should be as easy as it actually is in some of the countries, especially one where I'm actually from, that it should take you less than 10 minutes to register the company, which is right away EU company. Basically, with that, it should be very seamless to get a bank account and issue your licensing in your authorities, which then is linked to where you want to operate. So kind of as a subscription logic. And I don't think that's a very complicated thing to do. It's more about aligning the best practices today across Europe. If you talk about scaling, then I think I wouldn't expect anything less than we all feel that single market is a norm. So that means that if I want to hire someone with Estonian-based operations in, is it Germany or is it France, it shouldn't come with a big package of surprises. It should be that if I'm doing a license in one country, there is obviously logics that I can add on or subscribe, but this works everywhere. It should be that if I participate in tenders, European company is a European company. And I think if you're talking about business, this would benefit all of us tremendously. So just quick one.
Very good. Jumping to Heidi, who has also set up a robust, promising AI startup. What's your perspective of success in the EU in 2029?
Well, as a co-founder of a startup that's no longer a European startup, because we got acqui-hired by a US startup. Yes. And we did that because, unfortunately, there is no level playing field when it comes to access to finance. So we got acquired, or actually even acqui-hired, because it was much easier for them and for ourselves to close the deal by them getting the people and our IP rather than really acquiring the whole company, because when you have an entity in Croatia, nobody really wants to deal with the structure, administration, bureaucracy, and everything that comes with it. So that is one thing. And the other thing is that it's a startup in the US who got funding pre-seed, pre-revenue, practically even pre-product, pre-team, and they got immediately $5 million investment on a $30 million valuation. For us, especially from Croatia, there is no way, absolutely, to say polite, to get it. So it was either join them or, if you cannot fight them, then rather join them. So we did that. But I would like to then a little bit add on what Hedy said, so distinctions of startups and scale-ups. So yeah, when it comes to startups, I think the success metric would be the number of startups created. I think we need many, 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 many more new startups because you need a bigger pool, to start with, so that when you funnel it for those to actually end up being great scale-ups and unicorns, we need to help them out in the early stages, and I would say that one of the things that also can help a lot is tax incentives for the earliest investors. So for example, something that the UK has and has been doing for a long time now. And as for the scale-ups, I think one of the very good metrics of what success would look like is that we have many more unicorns that are actually European unicorns. Because right now, just recently, we had like Lovable that was all the rage in the news. Unicorn from Sweden. You know what's the address of their HQ? It's 111B South Governors Avenue, Dover, Delaware. So again, another company that moved their headquarters to the US in order to get to the funding and the money and the market and access to market necessary to get the unicorn status.
Thanks for sharing that, Heidi. Clark, you have seen a number of similar examples and some also positive stories from the various member states that you have a great overview of through your hat at the European Startup Association. Where would you see success in 2029?
Thanks, Andras. It is sad to hear these tales, but multiply it by a couple thousand, and this is the reality that Europe faces right now. And especially this funding gap, I think, is one of the first. So, I mean, for me, I've got probably 4 or 5 metrics I'd watch for, aside from the fact that the US has won the World Cup in 2026, I think we're projecting forward. First, the flywheel needs to start working. We keep talking about it, but it really needs to start working. And what does that mean? You're going to need to see more exits where the founders are from Europe and they aren't just having to sell out to a US company. but they're able to maybe do an IPO in Europe, which would be shocking since now most European founders are choosing New York. You're going to see especially closing this scale-up funding gap. Deal Room put out a study just a couple of weeks ago. We're kind of keeping pace somewhat in early stage and even mid stage, where we're 5 or 6 times outspent is in the scaling phase. It's dramatic, and it's the reason why even if we have a better startup, more innovative, along comes a deeper pocketed US startup and they can just buy them. So you're gonna have to see more billion-euro funds happening in Europe so that they could write 50 million tickets and invest. Another thing, we're big fans of EU Inc. Call it whatever you want, 28th regime, we need it. Imagine in 2029 that it's actually a smash, that US founders are setting up an EU Inc. instead of lovable AI going to Delaware. It's not a crazy idea. Why shouldn't Indian or Chinese or American entrepreneurs want to set up an EU Inc. immediately? It should be a first logical step outside of your home market. And one other one that's really close to my heart, I co-wrote a paper on what we call the Euro stack. There's a great movement afoot now in Europe to try and get free at the platform and infrastructure layer. It's going to take a long time, but if we could start seeing some market share of the European providers, maybe replacing Microsoft with the European Commission's platform might be a start. If we could see the market share start moving up in a federated system of interoperable cloud services, I think it could go a long way to unleashing a lot of investment at the platform and application layer in Europe.
Very interesting. Elena, you are the startup advisor to Commissioner Zaharieva. You have heard from the founders and the ecosystem leaders how they see success and what needs to be done. What do you think success is from the perspective of the strategy?
Thanks, Anders, and thanks for your feedback. So we and the Commissioner, we have consulted widely in the last months and in the lead to the startup and scale-up strategy. And the vision behind it perfectly echoes all the concerns that you've shared. The vision is actually quite simple. We already know that Europe is the best place to live. This is what the Commissioner said. I think we can all agree. We also want Europe to become the best place to do business in the world, the best place to start, grow, and keep a company. And we have very strong foundations in reality to be very optimistic about that vision. We already have world-class research, excellent talent, indeed a market of 450 million people, albeit not always easily accessible yet. We have great technologies. We still lead in certain areas, although we shouldn't be complacent about clean tech, in quantum. But indeed, we need to eliminate the friction points that now are preventing companies from growing at the pace that they want. So we have already created 35,000, over 35,000 startups in Europe. We have over 3,400 scale-ups. So the companies are there. Now we need them to be able to grow fast. So the 28th regime or whatever system we may call for companies to grow quickly across the European borders. So an action on regulation. We need to increase access to capital. We need the pension funds and the institutional investors to invest in VC funds in Europe and not in the United States, which unfortunately is what is happening today. We need the private sector, indeed, to invest more in our companies, private sector from the perspective of finance, so venture capital, but also industry to engage corporates, to engage with startups, to bring in innovation in their own business, but also to help the startups grow, to invest in them, and to help them exit. You touched on exits, Clark. Indeed, in Europe, it's difficult for startups to cash out on the investment, so either sell into a company or becoming a public company through an IPO. So with this work that we're doing now with the Startup Strategy and the Innovation Act that we shall adopt at the beginning of next year, this is what we hope to achieve. And we will want to hear, so the vision for 2029 is that entrepreneurs themselves will tell us that today is much faster, cheaper, simpler to start a company and grow it in Europe than it was 4 years ago.
That shall indeed be the objective. Now, if we move into specific strategic technologies, we can say probably that the EU's overall success will depend on how successful it is in leading in strategic technologies, such as AI, quantum, or clean tech. And again, we have some quite positive signs. If we look at deep tech in particular, where there's a huge funding boom, a third of VC investment in the EU is actually going to deep tech, with quite a number of new companies being created. But for founders, we hear that it is quite difficult to actually launch and scale properly a deep tech company for various reasons. R&D cycles are longer, you need more capital, the right talent is difficult to attract, and you're also facing quite some regulatory barriers. If you would need to point out a few areas where the most urgent action needs to be taken to help founders to build successful companies in strategic technologies, where would those be? And let's start with Heidi this time, maybe with an AI startup perspective. What would be necessary, I shall say, what would have been necessary for you to actually decide to scale in the EU?
Well, like I mentioned, the first thing definitely is access to financing and proper financing for deep tech, because as you did mention, deep tech usually requires many more years in R&D before you get to the actual customers and the actual revenue. And okay, now I know there are differences across Europe as well, but for example, in Croatia, there isn't that many choices for deep tech startups to really get the capital, and even the capital that is offered to them is under not such favorable conditions, let me put it that way. So I've heard stories about startups being offered 50,000 euros for over 10% of equity, and that coming from a VC, so not even like some private individuals who are, you can say that maybe they didn't know what they were doing. So that is definitely one thing, more financing, with the idea that those startups will not immediately get traction. That will come eventually, because there is, in general, an adage in the startup world saying that again, US VCs invest in startups to become successful. So they sort of throw the money at the idea and the potential, while the European VCs invest in startups when they are successful. And unfortunately, that also comes to the deep tech as well, because usually the first question is, like, what's your traction, how many customers you have, how much revenue you have, and then you try to explain how it works. The second part would be access. Then once you get through those hurdles of actually developing something and really getting customers. And I think one of the things that could be helpful is maybe with the public institutions becoming the first actual customers, being the ones who are saying, this is the challenges we have, and we would love to partner and work with startups who are trying to solve those difficult challenges. And here we will be that support for you, not necessarily, again, in terms of huge funding, but an actual problem, an actual becoming the first customer, because that is one thing that you also need to break. So the third would be then the size of the market, actually, single market, because that is also one of the big reasons why the startups from Europe go to the US, because it's more of a single market. It's not completely the same. Of course, the US has its differences with the states and different regulations and everything. But with the Delaware Inc., you know the rules of the game. It's one entity that is the same across the entire US, so the entire country. There is one language, there is one currency, and regulation is more or less, similar. So those are kind of the three things I think that we definitely need more in Europe, and I hope that with the 20th regime, or whatever it's going to be called, that we're going to really get a step closer to that single market that we really need in Europe.
Thanks a lot for bringing in the public procurement, or I shall say innovation procurement perspective, where clearly the EU is lagging behind. Less than half of our procurement spending in GDP terms is spent on innovation procurement, and there is a pot of 2,000 billion euros or more that could indeed help boost scale-ups through early public orders. Where do you see, Hedy, the main opportunities for Europe to do more in the strategic technology areas?
Can I answer it from two angles? I actually want to first answer that before we really can fly with the new technologies, we actually need to take care of our legacy. Because I think one of the massive blocker for new innovative startups is to scale when they need to partner up with, how to say, very politely, but let's say financial institutions or financial companies who often still use mainframe or try to find and train people who are mainly already in the second world, how to build cobalt. So this kind of technology should be obsolete. And I know there will be many arguing against, but maybe there's a thought to put out there is that with regulation, can we also try to push the slower part of the kind of economy, as Commissioner said earlier as well, one of the blocker is that actually our private sector, large organizations don't innovate enough. So you can't give them all the new tools as well or partner up with the new technologies if the legacy is still the main platform. So I think everybody can make their own conclusions, but I feel this could be something to think about. If you talk about now the really big newer technologies, I think Europe needs to really invest a lot in quantum, and this seems to be an area where we can't miss the game. Obviously, with that, all the cyber security topics are incredibly important. We have been pretty good at it at these certain parts of Europe. And definitely, it's no surprise the renewable green energy, but also everything in looking into circularity in terms of how to reuse the different materials, different components that are out there. I think these are, maybe that's not high tech. And I would feel much better if Europe would be the first in also everything to do with genome and human-related advances in technology. So to keep everything connected with that here. So.
Elena, bringing in now with you the public policy perspective, what do you take from what Heidi and Hedy have put on the table? What is on your mind, on the Commissioner's mind, in terms of addressing these particular challenges for the strategic technologies?
So the challenge with the strategic technologies is that they need still very intensive capital investment at the time where they're still very risky. And this is where an investment culture that is not sufficiently risk-taking then fails to support these companies. And this is the issue that we're facing at the moment. So Hedy mentioned some of the technologies. Of course, there are the strategic technologies, but in reality, the startup and scale-up strategy and the actions we will take aim to address all technologies. So we like to focus on these, and of course venture capital is often more, and this is where in reality we see more of a role for the European funding is to address those particularly risky ones, but whatever we will manage to do in removing borders, friction, making sure an Estonian company can hire more easily a German cross-border employee. This is the story that Hedy was telling us behind the scenes. Indeed, so this is the taxation issues for cross-border workers. So these are just examples that in reality will apply to every type of technology and company that wants to grow. So we are planning several actions, and definitely public procurement is something that Anders knows well. We discuss a lot, and that we hope to address with the revision of the public procurement directives. This will happen. And other actions, for example, related to the Scale-up Europe Fund. So this is a fund that will invest in scale-up companies, so companies that require above 30 million, which they can today already get with the European Innovation Council, and that are still very risky. we want to set up the Scaleup Fund, first of all, before the next budget. So talking about urgency, this is something we need to do soon. And yes, it will apply to all technologies, and importantly, it will be co-funded with the private sector. So this theme of bringing in the private sector is crucial. It's true that with public funding alone, let alone European funding alone, we cannot do this. So everybody needs to participate, the member states as well. Member states in particular, when we will discuss regulations and harmonization wherever we can, because this is really the crux of the game. Also, when it comes to sectors, so there are, we've spoken about company registration that needs harmonization, taxation, but also there are regulations that apply to specific sectors that then impede the take-up of technologies in all the member states, because the regulations are not equally conducive to selling certain products. So all these are areas where we will do our best to intervene. In some, I think, it's clear what we can do. In others, we're still discussing in the college, also with other competent commissioners. But on the support and on increasing the number of startups and on helping startups to launch, there is another point that I would like to mention, especially to this audience, and is the support that academia and the academic institutions can give to those academic spin-outs that are based on advanced research and high tech. So the need to translate excellent science into companies, which is sometimes more difficult, as we know, because they're based on very complex technologies, on multidisciplinary technologies. This is also an area where we would like to intervene, is what we call the lab to unicorn in our strategy. And one action we definitely want to do in a way to bypass these regulatory hurdles that are difficult and may take a little bit longer than startups would like, but we'll do our best. So one action will be to network the current accelerators that are already providing support to companies in their own countries and help them help each other. So in a way, this will open up a European market to companies that at the moment are mainly supported locally. So this is really the vision for measures that will help companies in strategic technologies, and not necessarily.
Well, Clark, you have heard the policy perspective, and you're probably one of the most knowledgeable people of the strategy actions themselves. You had a number of opportunities to react on those. Is this enough, what you have heard so far? Is there something missing that we still need to do specifically for scaling up in strategic technology areas?
I think a lot of these measures are absolutely on the right track. So, I mean, I can only say yes, yes, yes. There's only so much that the public sector can spend. So, as the Commissioner and Elena keep saying, I mean, we have to get more private capital into the system. It's really one of the key elements. So, again, capital, capital, capital. But I would go into maybe 3 strategic areas where I think we still, let's say, have a chance, where we really could be at the forefront and be a part of a revolutionary technology that's emerging. I mean, all is not lost, so it's not just a gloom and doom panel here. Europe really has a chance if we get the capital to support these companies. But I would highlight 3 sectors because it's really great to see. AI, I flew in from Berlin this morning with an AI founder I know. He was really one of the first in the world doing AI for material science research. He got an EIC accelerator grant. He's trying to raise 30 to 50 million right now. He has a 3-year head start on everybody in the US. In the last few weeks, though, 2 different startups in the US with just a PowerPoint and an idea, who are 3 years behind him in technology. One of them has raised 200 million, one of them has raised 235 million. He's trying to raise 30 to 50. Do the math. I mean, he's going to get steamrolled. He estimates maybe he has another year or 2 of head start. This is what we're up against. We can't bring great tech and innovation to a financial battle. We'll lose that one every time. Sorry, that's just the way it is. And because of that, we have to really be smart about where we put our capital. So, in quantum, it's greenfield. It's all up for grabs. 50 years of computer technology being swept aside by a new technology. No wonder IBM is the biggest investor from the US. They made Microsoft big with a bad deal 50 years ago. They figured it out. So we have a chance. Most of the capital in quantum has been going into photonics. 95% of the capital invested into photonics is in the US. Is that race over? Who knows? Where Europe still has a chance, we've put in about a third of the capital in neutral atoms, for instance. So there's still tech areas where you could dive down deep in the sector and say, hey, we've got a shot here. Actually, in neutral atoms, we've got a French and a German startup, Pascal and Planck, who've demonstrated way more qubits per euro produced. So we've got a shot, but we have to apply our capital really smartly. And the final one I'd love to mention, because the commissioner brought it up and also the speaker on a panel before, the most innovative place in defense technology in the world is Eastern Ukraine right now. And if we would learn from Ukraine, not only just on the battlefield, but how they've revolutionized the way civil society works with military, then we can also, through their innovation ability, really be the most innovative place in the world in defending democracy. And it's extremely important. But there's an article yesterday, the American Dynamism, if you know Mark Andreessen of Andreessen Horowitz, put out his big newsletter yesterday complaining about the terrible procurement process in US. It's terrible innovation. They're dinosaurs. They're losing an asymmetric war on the battlefield of Russia in terms of technology. We have a chance to leapfrog in quantum, in good parts of AI where we can pick our battles, but especially also in defense tech. So it's not all lost. We really have a chance to be the world leader in a lot of technologies. But again, if we win in the lab and lose in the marketplace or lose on Wall Street, then all we're doing really is just preparing charity for US investors. So,
Okay, that carves out quite neatly the things to do and the responsibilities that I think various actors have in the EU. And I think many have said that there's only as much as a specific institution, the Commission can do to drive policy and to have a strategy, but of course any strategy and any sets of actions is only as good as then it is implemented. And we have seen at various levels, both in the EU, both at the member state level, strategies which, well, became nice pieces of paper. So the question is, how can we ensure that this time it is different? How will we ensure that the strategy is implemented, it is monitored, and those who are responsible for it are actually, for its implementation, are also held accountable? So I bring that first to Elena. What's your take on that?
We all know the mantra, you get what you measure. So this is the idea that now we're going to measure as much as possible with quantitative indicators the growth of the European startup ecosystem. So we're going to, first of all, come up with a definition of startup that will apply in the entire Europe, ideally, because at the moment every country defines this differently, so we cannot know what's happening until we do that. And then we will create a European scoreboard to measure how many startups, but also how many of these startups grow, how many centaurs, which are companies valued more than 100 million, and how many unicorns we have in Europe, more than 1 billion. So this is one thing. On the other hand, not everything that matters can always be measured with indicators. So we are also going to survey the ecosystem regularly, annually. And we will keep engaging very actively with the forum that the Commissioner has created, the Startup and Scaleup Forum that meets regularly, sometimes with the Commissioner, sometimes only with the Cabinet and ourselves, the DG, to keep sounding our ideas, getting feedback, and also updating on the progress of these actions. So this is very important. It's very motivating for us as well to hear the feedback from the startups, from the associations, and to understand what works, what doesn't work. And also to bring this feedback not only to the policies for which we are directly responsible, but also those of the other cabinets. For example, the 28th regime, we didn't mention this, in reality is not directly under the responsibility of Commissioner Zaharieva. So we work very closely with the rest of the college, back to a question of me before, to the Commissioner. We have to work together to make sure that we implement properly all these different actions and that we measure them. So this is what we're going to do.
Okay. That's very reassuring. Let's see what we can do with the involvement of the other stakeholders. That's how much the Commission can actually do. Clark, you have seen various ecosystems function. You are in touch with a large number of stakeholders. Where do you see particular ways of collaborating with them, engaging with them, to really sort of spread this responsibility for making EU the best place to start and scale?
I think the more we can act as Europeans instead of just French, Germans, Austrians, Croatians, Estonians, the better. And that's easy to say on stage, but I know every politician, you know, all politics is local, as Tip O'Neill used to say in the US. But there are really interesting programs and things that are moving at the European level that just need more wind at their backs. The European Tech Champions Initiative, where a lot of the member states are putting money into a fund of funds, which is supposed to then power funds that can invest cross-border in Europe. I mean, these are the kind of things. I said last week, InnoSwiss convened a group of the innovation agencies of Europe. 5 or 6 of them sat around the table. They noted they'd never really sat around a table before. So imagine 27 member states, each doing their own innovation programs, each making their own little bets on their own national quantum champion. We have to pool our resources. We have to get our capital more aligned and start acting more like Europeans. So I think the innovation ecosystems, these agencies need to start thinking more European and less national. I would, maybe a radical idea, I would take your KPIs, or ESNA, the Startup Nations Alliance, is tracking them on a website, how many nations are living up to the Startup Nation standards. Why don't we tie that to EIC funding? Why throw money out the window? If your member state is not doing any kind of startup reform to ensure that startups can make it in the marketplace, why should we put money into your research institutions knowing it's a financial dead end? I'm sorry. I mean, we need to have some things have consequences. So I think there's a lot of ways to start acting more European. And I know it's, again, really hard for politicians to ever get elected saying, go Europe. They all, you know, want their own flag flying. But, you know, we've seen it time and again, if we get picked off as member states and as startups from small member states where even the capital isn't thinking across Europe, we can't win. We can only win together.
Heidi, you are not only a startup founder, but you're also the CEO and the head of the Croatian Startup Association. So from your experience with that hat on, how do you see the cooperation, engagement with the stakeholders, decision makers?
I'm thinking, should I be really blunt and honest, or?
We're amongst
let me put it this way. Up until a few months ago, I would say, what cooperation? Because there was no dialogue, there was no discussions, there was no sitting at a table, we did not, like people from the startup scene did not know who we can like ping and pull at a sleeve in the government, who to talk to, who could help us, which ministry, who's in charge, who is willing to talk to us. So now, relatively recently, we got the ministry, which among others now is in charge of digital transformation, so kind of there is a dialogue starting there. There was an initiative and initiation of a dialogue from the Ministry of Finance, for example, for the fintech scene. So things are happening. I wish they were happening on a much larger scale and faster, and that we actually see some things moving on. For example, we are only now discussing the national strategy for AI in Croatia, which I find completely ridiculous, considering that when it comes to private sector, we've had an NGO gathering the entire AI scene in Croatia since 2019. We were among the first in the region to actually have a huge number of AI startups, an AI conference, and that's the biggest AI conference in the region. But we never got the counterpart again to discuss with. And now just a note, that I did not mention, but Elena mentioned it, about the regulation and making it easier. When it comes to AI, again, because we've talked about strategic technologies, the startup scene in the area of AI is a little bit petrified of the AI Act. And it's petrified because of the uncertainties and unknowns of what its implementation is going to look like. Because every member state is allowed to figure their own way of implementing it, of evaluating the risks, of choosing who are going to be the people who are the ones deciding if the project is risky and what's the risk level. And if we want to be European, as Clark has said, I think really that something has to be done on that level as well, so that we know the rules of the game across Europe and not that each, again, member state is doing something on its own and something that you cannot scale across Europe. But again, back to the initial question, we definitely need more dialogue with the public institutions. And I also think smaller countries who are member states sometimes need a little bit of a nudge from Brussels, you know, a bit of a consequence that Clark said to really speed up things, because the private sector, especially, again, talking from Croatia, from the innovation sector in Croatia, we often feel very frustrated because we see how small things could make a big difference, but we cannot even get the small things to move.
Well, Estonia is also not the largest of all member states, but it is particularly successful and large in its successful startup environment. So what's the secret, Hedi, from that perspective on bringing in the stakeholders, bringing in the national authorities, recognizing what the startup community needs?
Well, I think there will be multiple different reasons for Estonian startup success, but to just name the few is we have a very good community that supports each other, not only sponsored by the state, but actually a really good set of first unicorn founders that did successful exit, who have actually contributed back to the society a lot. And I think this is something that deserves to be mentioned. So how can you engage the innovative community to actually give back as well? And maybe this is something we should strive for EU level as a good benchmark. How can we bring the ones that have been successful here to really try to contribute back more? And I think they are. If we're talking about Estonia, obviously the overall logic of simplify everything, fast, speed, have a company, 10 minutes, everything. Now you can actually get divorced as well digitally. This was always the thing that you couldn't do for a long time. I haven't tried, but I I know you can. So the notary was the thing that came during COVID, so everything is there. I don't think Estonia needs to go back in time when we release new schemas. I think everyone else should catch up. And I think that should be the benchmark, how we think across Europe. And we can find tons of reasons why it's easier in Estonia than in Germany or some other countries. But I think that should be the thinking. Let's try to learn from the best practices, and there are so many around Europe. And let's try to put them together, learn from them, make them better, and just implement and line, especially in the areas where we should actually be one. President von der Leyen has stressed in her speech many times that Europe has been underestimated many times, is it during COVID or Ukraine, etc. So why don't we see the sense of urgency in every member state that this is today the time when we actually need to think over the borders and really, as Clark stressed with very good example, find ways to get that sense of urgency everywhere and build alignment. And maybe next to alignment, there's also one very good word. It's also agility or agile way of bringing things out. I know probably this is the opposite of how Brussels and Europe institutions are working, but maybe if we now collaborate with startup industry, it's not only about us having to adapt in the speed and everything what is there in European institutions, but maybe also let's meet halfway. So if we talk about 28th regime, can't we already start executing things out? Some things that are quickly, let's agree, out and until all the way to the full single market. So maybe we need to challenge ourselves in the ways of working, thinkings as well along the way.
Thank you very much. I think we can wrap up. I take immediately 3 things away. One is the absolute sense of urgency. Many of you have stressed that. The second is, we haven't mentioned that, but it does come through this whole of government approach, regulation, tied with funding, possibly in a conditionality way. Interesting what you suggested there. And then thirdly, the strong involvement of not only the European level, but also the member states, governments, and stakeholders. And I think if we continue on this path, I hope that in 2029, which we discussed at the beginning, we can take stock and we can come with some very powerful metrics showing that we have done well, including probably relocating a Heidi's company by that time into the EU. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you so much, Andras. I think you'll all agree that was a fascinating panel. Many of us were there taking notes. Thank you so much. You were absolutely brilliant. Very frank, very blunt. Exactly what we need here in Brussels. And that is a wrap, in fact, for this part of the afternoon. But I do invite you all now to go to the exhibition, grab a coffee, and then we'll be meeting back here at 6 o'clock with the Executive Vice President of the European Commission to discuss science in AI. So see you then, and thank you so much for your attention.